Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 198. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Nancy McCabe about her new book, Vaulting Through Time. This is Nancy's first novel for young adults. A 16-year-old biracial high school student named Elizabeth is coming to the end of her competitive gymnastics career. But that isn't the only thing that has her head spinning. Elizabeth discovers a mystery surrounding her birth that her mother has kept secret from her. She also finds herself catapulted through time, through her family's own history, as well as great moments in gymnastics history, in order to solve that mystery and stop a fellow time traveler whose actions may prevent her from being born at all. This book holds a special place in Nancy's heart because she has always loved time travel stories, and her main character Elizabeth was inspired by her own daughter, who was a competitive gymnast. Nancy has taught writing at the university level for many years, but she admits Vaulting Through Time is unlike anything she has ever written before. In this episode, I'll chat with Nancy about her writing journey, why she credits her students with convincing her to try her hand at writing a time travel novel, and the one simple truth she tells all her students: the more you read, the better writer you will become, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Nancy McCabe, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
And thank you so much for having me.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new book, your new young adult novel, Vaulting Through Time. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Okay, sure. It's actually my first novel for young adults. And it is about a gymnast who has kind of reached the end of her road in terms of competitive gymnastics. As she gets older, she's 16, her body's developing. She's having fear issues about throwing her body into the air. She realizes that this thing that has really dominated her life is probably going to be over soon. And then she discovers she has bigger problems. She discovers that her mother has kept from her a really big secret regarding her birth. She also discovers that a watch that she found in an abandoned house, is a time machine. So she discovers that she can travel through time to get answers to her questions. But it's sort of mysterious because the watch is set up for certain dates, and many of those dates are famous gymnastics events. And so she basically has to go to the different times, the different places on the watch to find out why in the world there's all these particular locations and how that connects to her own background. And as far as inspiration goes, my daughter was a competitive gymnast for 8 years. And so I spent a lot of time at gymnastics meets. I've always really been interested in time travel. So I thought that it would be kind of fun to put those things together and see what kind of story would emerge.
What was the spark for you, that thing that got you started down this road? Was it any one thing in particular? Was it a character, a dialogue, a scene, something that happened in real life? What was that sort of one thing that you thought, there might be a story here?
That developed really gradually. It started because I was sitting at these meets for hours and hours and hours, and they tend to be really long, and people aren't really competing through much of it. They're warming up, they're getting organized, they're rotating to different events. And so there's a lot of dead space. And so I just started thinking, well, what would happen if I wrote a story, about a gymnast who time travels? And so I started kind of brainstorming about that. And it was kind of a game. It wasn't really something I planned to pursue. But then the more I played with it, the more I got into it. And eventually I felt more committed to it. It was probably when my daughter first went to college that I said, I really want to see what I can do with this. And it was kind of one of those things that distracted me and kept me occupied when she first went away and the house was so quiet. And the more I worked on it, the more invested I got, and the more I was like, yeah, I think even though I've never done anything like this before, I've never written anything about time travel, I've never written a young adult novel, it became more and more something that I was committed to. And the character is very much based on my daughter. So that was sort of fun, like reliving some particular moments and conversations and thinking about some of the things that had happened in our life together, especially traveling all that time for gymnastics meets.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your main character, Elizabeth. Tell us
Yes.
a little bit about her. And then I'm curious, what aspects of your daughter did you draw from when you created this character?
Yeah. So Elizabeth is, like I said, she's always loved gymnastics, but she also kind of realizes that maybe there's other things out there that she is interested in and wants to explore. And she's a little bit scared to take those steps because her life has always consisted of one thing. She's impulsive. She has a really close relationship with her mother. So of course it's really devastating when she finds out that her mother hasn't been fully telling her the truth. But she's also she discovers, especially in her time travels, that she's very resourceful, that she's clever, that she can figure things out, that she can survive. The parts that were based on my daughter were probably the parts of her that are really funny. And, my daughter is very tough in many ways, but, she knows how to survive. She loves to travel. She loves to figure things out. And so Elizabeth draws a lot of those characteristics from her. Elizabeth is partly based on me too. When I was that age, there are definitely aspects of her that are more me than my daughter. So it was kind of fun combining, some of our characteristics into one character. But I think maybe the hardest question I faced, or the biggest dilemma during the writing, was my daughter is from China, and she has always taken pride in the fact that she's Chinese. And so I felt that was really important, that I couldn't create a character who was, I'm white. It was a really tough decision because, I was like, can I really write in a first person point of view, this character of this girl who might be Chinese? And then also, if she were Chinese, she might, like if she were fully Chinese, if she were 100%, she would probably realize that there was something off in what her mother had told her about her heritage. And so eventually I decided that she would discover that she had some Asian heritage. And so, that was something that I felt like I had to make that decision to honor my daughter, because being Chinese is so important to her. But it was a tough decision what to do about those heritage issues.
In writing that aspect of the book, did your daughter have input? Did she help you with that part of it, or was that down to just the experience of her growing up and raising her and research you've done?
Yeah, I wrote 2 books about China adoption. I wrote a memoir about the process of adopting her called Meeting Sophie, that came out way back in 2005, 2003. Now I don't remember. And then I wrote a second book about our return to China when she was 10, to, see what we could do to reconnect her to a culture that she really valued, and to see what we could find out about her, about where she was from. And that book, called Crossing the Blue Willow Bridge, came out when she was 13, which is sort of the time that no kid really wants a book to come out about them. But she was actually always really supportive and really excited and really pleased to be represented in my books. And the first one came out when she was 5, so she didn't necessarily approve everything in that book. I was kind of, I was very careful not to reveal anything that I thought would make her uncomfortable. And then in the book that came out when she was 13, she read over, either I read to her or she read herself every part of it. And she had veto power. She could tell me what she didn't want me to include. So, and really, she did not exercise that much. Only once has she ever read an essay of mine and said, no, I don't think, she actually didn't even come out and say, no, you shouldn't do anything with that. She was kind of like, well, I don't. And I said, so you're not comfortable with this, are you? And she said, well, no. But she couldn't explain why. And I said, you really don't have to explain why. If you're not comfortable, I'm just going to put it aside. And so I had a pretty good sense of what she'd be comfortable with or not when I was writing this character. I asked for her input. She was really busy with college and with her own life. And so, I try to walk the line very carefully of involving her in what I'm doing, but not letting it dominate, our lives too much, because she has things that she needs to do too. So she really didn't give me a lot of input into that book, except for just sort of, casually when we would have conversations about various things. So, and she's read parts of it and she's like, oh, this is so strange because these characters are having conversations that we've had. But, in general, I think that she recognizes parts of herself, but she also understands that it's a very fictionalized version of herself. And she doesn't quite identify with it in the same way she did with the more direct portrayals of her in the creative nonfiction books I wrote.
Yeah. Let's talk about the mother-daughter relationship that you've written into this book. It's key to the story. So can you describe for us the growth, the changes in that relationship from early on in the book to what happens, towards the end? What journey do these characters go on relative to the relationship they have with each other?
Right. Yeah. So at the beginning, Elizabeth really thinks of her relationship with her mother as very close. They have inside jokes, they have a certain rhythm. Her mother's a single mother like I was. And so they have a really intense relationship, which I think is often typical with single mothers of daughters and, single mothers and daughters. But then, it's very jarring to her to discover that there's something her mother hasn't told her. And it turns out that there are probably some good reasons why her mother didn't tell her, but it's still really a difficult situation. And of course, I never, again, going back to my own experience, I've never withheld anything that important from my daughter. So I had to kind of imagine what that would be like. But I think that in our own lives, since my daughter had just gone away to college, I was thinking about those disruptions in relationships, especially close relationships, how you forge a different kind of relationship when your child grows up. So that was definitely part of Elizabeth's journey, is discovering that she's going to have to forge a new relationship with herself, with her mother, with her life. So when she time travels, she's on her own. She misses her mom. She's really worried that she won't ever be able to get back. There are points at which she's not sure if she's going to erase her own existence or change things so that she is never raised by the mother that raised her. And so that's quite a crisis for her. But in the course of time traveling and being on her own, she also discovers that, she grows quite a bit. She discovers that she can be independent, that she can make decisions, that she gets to know herself better. So by the time she comes back, and I hate to make it a spoiler, but she does eventually make it back after some trials. She is ready to forge that new relationship with her mother, and her mother has accepted that she's growing up and that they need to have a more honest relationship. So yeah, they do both go on a journey, particularly Elizabeth, in discovering who she is in relationship to other people.
And for you as a mom, what do you think your reaction would be if you discovered your own daughter was out there in time somewhere on her own? It seems like a terrifying idea.
It is a terrifying idea. I don't think I could have written it from the mother's point of view. It's so much easier to write from the point of view of the person that's traveling, the person that is having the adventures, than the person that's at home, waiting. Of course, she also finds out that time doesn't really pass in the current world while she's away. So her mother actually hasn't, she worries that her mother is going to be bereft and devastated and worry about her. But in fact, the mother is completely unaware of the time travel at that point. But yeah, no, it would be really scary, but, and of course, some of that is based on the fact my daughter loves to travel. And when she was, we traveled a lot together to China and other places when she was young. When she was 20, she traveled to Italy to be an au pair in the summer, and that was absolutely terrifying. So I certainly could, think through some of those emotions based on experiences that we had.
What led you to decide on the aspects or parameters of time travel for your story? So the dates they travel back to, the reasons you selected those dates, the parameters for how and why, and the where, and the what happens when you get there. How did you decide what the rules would be for your story?
Right, right. When I first wrote it, I just kind of wrote and I didn't really think much about the rules. I just wanted to get the story down. And then later in the process, I was like, okay, these rules have to be consistent. I have to make sure that they make sense. And so I did spend a lot of time going back through, coming through, making sure that, it's like, okay. I mean, I knew I wanted her to go to particular moments in gymnastics history. I knew I wanted that to be what was programmed into the watch. She discovers at one point that she can program a new date into the watch, but even later, she discovers that the only reason she could program that particular date into a particular place in the watch is that that place already existed in that watch. So basically, she can only go to places that are already programmed. And then there is a little twist halfway through the book where somebody else acquires a similar time machine and with the same dates programmed into it and wreaks havoc. So, this is a person who is in danger of erasing Elizabeth's existence or completely changing it. And so Elizabeth has to try to follow her to figure out what she's going to do and how to stop her. So, I did have to really think through a lot about what a lot of those rules would be. Like, just little things like if you travel to this date, when do you arrive? If somebody else travels to this date, do they arrive at the same time? Are you both going to land in the same moment? I had to really work through a lot of that stuff. And I did a lot of research too on just different theories of time travel, different ways that scientists have theorized that, we could supposedly, it's all in fun, but I don't think that very few people really think that we are going to time travel, but there's a lot of theories about how it could work. And so I really looked at those and tried to construct my own method. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, why didn't I just make it magical? Why did I come up with this whole scientific thing? It would have been so much easier, but it right. seemed important for this particular book to have this explanation.
Yeah, it is amazing in writing fiction, just how much research goes into making something up.
Mm-hmm.
So my guess is even if you had made it magical, you probably still would have spent a great deal of time researching various theories.
Yeah.
Well, now that you've written a YA novel, do you have plans to write more of them? Is this a genre you think you want to produce some more work in?
Yeah, I do. It was really fun to write, and I have a related book kind of in mind, maybe kind of a sequel. And so that is something that I would really like to do. I'm interested in writing for all audiences. I mean, I would like to do more young adult stuff. I have a middle grade novel coming out in 2025, and I have an interest in writing more for that particular audience. And I still write nonfiction for adults, and I've published one adult novel, and I'm interested in doing more of that too. So I'm just kind of interested in doing everything. But there is something just especially fun about writing for young people.
Yeah. So you've written a lot of different kinds of books, different genres, different types of stories. Are there ones that you find easier to write in? Does it come more naturally? Or do you find the same challenges in one tend to follow you into whatever other genres you write in?
Yeah, I think every new project presents completely new challenges, although every genre, you bring the same techniques to those. I started out writing fiction. That's what I wrote my entire childhood. I did my MFA in fiction. I did a PhD with a concentration in fiction writing. And then I started writing creative nonfiction and published several books that were nonfiction. But the only reason I was able to make that transition was because creative nonfiction borrows from fiction techniques. I knew how to write scenes. I knew how to characterize people, write dialogue, that kind of thing. So I was able to bring that knowledge. And so technically, I find that there are lots of overlaps. But writing a middle grade book, I really had to struggle with figuring out how to get the voice right of this 12-year-old. Writing Vaulting Through Time, I really focused on characterization and plot and how to make all those things work together. So yeah, I do feel like everything is a new challenge. I mean, right now I'm writing a nonfiction book that has to do with the history of the old house that I live in. And it requires a completely different kind of research. And there's really sparse information available. So you have to do a lot of speculation and connecting of ideas. So yeah, to me, that's the fun of writing is just taking on a different challenge every time while still bringing, the knowledge that I have about writing in general to each genre.
You mentioned you started writing fiction as a kid. What's your earliest memory of writing, of being a writer, of wanting to be a writer?
I wrote all the time growing up. I think my earliest memory is maybe I was like 7 or 8. And I mean, I have very early memories of my mother reading to me, even way before that. But when I was 7 or 8, I brought home a pile of books from the public library. And my dad always made us sit down at the table first thing when we came home from the library and write down the titles of everything that we had checked out, because he was afraid we would lose them and he wanted to be sure that we could gather them, all before we went back the next time. And so I was writing this list of books, and all of a sudden I just remember being seized by inspiration, and I flipped over the paper and started writing this story about a British girl, and I must have just been reading some British children's book. But I remember just being so excited by that. And I spent so much of my childhood just writing. Like a lot of kids draw, like the natural thing that they do is art, and the natural thing that I did was writing, was words. I found a thing I wrote for school when I was 9 saying, when I grow up, I want to be a writer. So it was always something that was there, and I don't remember where that even originated. I just knew it was something I loved to do.
So fast forward a few years.
Yes.
Now you are not only writing, but you teach writing.
Yes.
I'm curious about a couple of things with respect to teaching writing. There's sort of universal truths when teaching students that you find when they master certain things, or when they at least practice certain things, it improves their writing, their ability to create effective stories. Are there sort of general rules of thumb, or is it unique to each writer?
Yeah, I think that honestly, the more you read, the better you learn how to write, because you see how other writers are incorporating particular techniques, how they construct things. So I like I said, it was very much an outgrowth for me of being a reader to become a writer. And I think that's a kind of universal truth that the more you read, the more you're inspired, the more ideas you have, the more directions you see for, where your work might go. That's something I really emphasize in my teaching. We read a lot of models in my undergraduate classes, and my graduate students do reading lists that they read throughout the semester and write about the particular things that they're reading and the techniques that strike them, the ways that they can learn craft from that work. So, for me, I feel like the breakthroughs that I see happen when somebody has, like, they put a lot of time into it. They really are practicing their craft, and they're really looking around them, looking at the world around them, and for ways to continue to develop that craft.
Is there anything that comes to mind that you feel you in turn have learned from your students teaching them over the years?
Oh, definitely. I honestly would have never probably undertaken a time travel book if it weren't for my students, who are, very interested in, often very interested in fantasy. I've had a lot of students interested in science fiction, and they aren't things that I ever thought that I would write. But I teach a class in time travel fiction, and I was teaching that. It was like 10 years ago when I first started, coming up with the idea for this particular book. So, it was through teaching that class and talking about the genre and looking at students' work. And like, even today, I mean, there are genres that I think that I don't like, but then this semester, for instance, I'm having my advanced fiction students do presentations on different genres, because I know that they often really love genre fiction of various kinds. And so far this semester, we've had a presentation on horror and a presentation on fantasy. And it's been really enlightening for me to realize that I've actually read a lot of things in those genres, and I actually have appreciated a lot of things in those genres. And what leaps to my mind when I hear people say fantasy or horror is like, maybe scary movies that I probably wouldn't ever go see, or things that completely take place in fantastical worlds that I might not be as interested in. But what I've discovered is like, oh yeah, there are definitely elements of those genres in so much of what I read. And I have read things that definitely fit into those genres and appreciated them a lot. And, I think that fiction, good fiction, stuff that I really like, doesn't necessarily easily fall into one genre. There are strands from a lot of different ones. And so that's something that I really think my students have influenced me to embrace.
I'm curious about the relationship between teaching writing and doing it yourself. I imagine that you at least try and think about some of the things that you teach while you're writing your stories.
Yeah.
Does the reverse happen? While you're teaching, do you also try and put it into context about what you've experienced, and therefore what your students might also be experiencing?
Yeah, I really think that it is valuable to study from working writers because they are grappling with the same questions that you are every day. And when I was doing my undergraduate and my MFA, and I was working with working writers who were also very in tune with what their process was and what worked for them. And I find the same thing, a student will write something and we'll be getting ready to talk about it. And I'll be like, I'm facing a really similar dilemma in my own writing. And here's how I've addressed it or solved it or, came at that particular problem. And so, yeah, I absolutely think that just the fact that I'm there doing it every day is advantageous to the people that I teach. And certainly when I see how they do things, what they're inspired by, that definitely feeds my own writing as well. I often get very inspired, seeing other people trying different kinds of experiments and realizing how I can do something. A couple of years ago, I was doing a workshop with graduate students on different forms of essays, and somebody suggested an approach that I went, oh my gosh, that's totally what I'm looking for this one essay. I can't seem to figure out how to write. And it turned out to be exactly what I needed. So, I do think that we fuel each other, we give each other inspiration, we learn from each other.
I want to talk quickly about upcoming projects. So you mentioned you have a middle grade coming out in 2025 and thoughts
Yes.
for another YA, but can you talk a little bit about what your plans are sort of in the next couple of years, books you want to release, other goals that you might have?
Yeah. So I'm working on lots of stuff. Like I have this creative nonfiction thing that I'm working on about the history of my house and the people that lived here. And I'm doing that as a series of essays. And I'd like to do something with that. The middle grade is coming out in 2025. And I'd like to play around with some ideas for both sequels to that and to my YA novel. And I actually have a short novel that's coming out this winter in February. That's for adults. It's a satire. It's a comic novel, right? So yeah, my ultimate goal, I think, or my ultimate dream would be to just be able to write full time. And so, maybe I'll be able to move towards that a little bit more, because I do have, I could probably tell you about 15 books that are started in progress, or 15 projects that I would really like to work on. So yeah, when I was younger, I don't think I could have worked 8 hours a day on writing, but now I definitely feel like I could do that. And that would be really fun.
Well, let's hope that happens for you soon, because it sounds like we'll all be looking forward to the things you have in progress. But in the meantime, if people want to learn more about you, your books, upcoming releases, things you have going on, where should they go to find you and that information?
Yeah, my website is at nancymccabe.org. You know what? I think I just got that wrong. It's nancymccabe.net. Okay. I'm always, Yeah. We just updated it. So it's got the 2 upcoming projects on there too, and we'll be filling in information as we find out more. But yeah, I try to keep that up to date. And there's a contact sheet there too.
And if people are looking to purchase a copy of Vaulting Through Time, where can they go to buy it?
So it's available on all online booksellers. So, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's available from the publisher, CamCat Publishers, directly. And really anywhere that sells books can either carry it or order it.
Good. Well, Nancy, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with Vaulting Through Time and all the other works in progress that you have going on. You're going to be busy for quite a while. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published, as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author, or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.